London, 1951, the height of the Cold War. In the smoky gentlemen's clubs of St. James's Street, the ruling class of the British Empire gathered to drink whiskey and discuss the threat of Soviet communism. These were men of breeding, men who had attended the finest private schools like Eton and Harrow, men who had studied at Oxford and Cambridge. They spoke with the same cut-glass accent. They wore the same tailored suits. They trusted each other implicitly because they were part of the establishment. They believed that a spy looked like a villain from a movie, a shady foreigner in a trench coat lurking in a dark alley. They believed that treason was something committed by the poor, the desperate, or the uneducated. They could not conceive that the greatest threat to the West was sitting right next to them in the club, pouring another drink, laughing at their jokes, and wearing the same school tie. This is the story of the most devastating spy ring in history. It is not a story about money. It is not a story about blackmail. It is a story about ideology and the arrogance of the British elite. It is the story of 5 young men who were handed the keys to the kingdom and who handed them straight to Joseph Stalin. Welcome to the Shadow Dossier. Today we open the file on the Cambridge Five. To understand this betrayal, we have to go back to the 1930s. The world was on fire. The Great Depression had crushed the global economy. In Germany, Adolf Hitler was rising to power, marching under the swastika. In Spain, fascism was spreading. To a generation of young, idealistic intellectuals at Cambridge University, capitalism seemed broken. Democracy seemed weak. And the only force that appeared strong enough to stop the Nazis was the Soviet Union. It was in this atmosphere that the NKVD, the precursor to the KGB, spotted an opportunity. They sent a legendary recruiter named Arnold Deutsch to Cambridge. Deutsch didn't look for outcasts. He looked for the golden boys. He looked for the students who would one day run the British government. His first target was a charismatic, handsome and brilliant young man named Kim Philby. Philby was already a committed communist, but Deutsch gave him an order that would change his life. Go underground. Cut your ties with the Communist Party, pretend to become a conservative, join the establishment, and wait. Philby did exactly that. And he recruited his friends. Donald Maclean, the son of a cabinet minister. Guy Burgess, a brilliant but chaotic alcoholic. Anthony Blunt, an art historian who was a distant cousin of the Queen. And John Cairncross, a quiet, intense scholar from the working class. These 5 men infiltrated every major institution of British power. Maclean joined the Foreign Office, Burgess joined the BBC and later MI6, Blunt joined MI5, Cairncross joined the Treasury and later Bletchley Park, and Philby, Kim Philby, joined the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, and rose to the very top. For 20 years, they operated with impunity. Let's look at the damage they did. It is almost impossible to calculate. John Cairncross, often called the Fifth Man, was stationed at Bletchley Park during World War II. This was where the genius Alan Turing had broken the Nazi Enigma code. The ultra-intelligence derived from Enigma was the most guarded secret of the war. Churchill often didn't even share it with his own commanders, unless absolutely necessary, but Cairncross smuggled the raw decrypts out of the secure facility in his trousers. He handed over thousands of Enigma decrypts to the Soviets. Because of him, the Red Army knew the German battle plans for the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, before the Germans even launched the attack. You could argue that a British traitor helped the Soviets win the war on the Eastern Front. Then there was Donald Maclean. After the war, he was posted to the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. He was the secretary of the Combined Policy Committee on Atomic Energy. He had a pass to the Atomic Energy Commission. Maclean sat in the meetings where the US and Britain discussed the development of the nuclear bomb. He knew how many bombs America had. He knew the production rates of uranium. He passed all of this to Moscow. When Stalin negotiated with Truman at Potsdam, he wasn't bluffing. He knew exactly what cards the Americans held because Donald Maclean had shown him the deck. But the most dangerous of them all was Kim Philby. Philby was a masterpiece of deception. He was charming, he was a heavy drinker, but he never let his mask slip. His colleagues at MI6 adored him. They groomed him for leadership. By 1949, Philby was sent to Washington, D.C. as the chief liaison between British intelligence and the CIA. Imagine the irony. The man responsible for coordinating the fight against Soviet spies was a Soviet spy. In Washington, Philby became best friends with James Angleton, the rising star of the CIA. They met for lunch every week at Harvey's restaurant. They drank whiskey and traded secrets. Angleton, who would later become the most paranoid man in the CIA, trusted Philby more than anyone else in the world. He told Philby the names of American agents operating behind the Iron Curtain. He told him about planned operations. And Philby killed them all. One of the most tragic examples was the operation in Albania. The CIA and MI6 had planned a massive covert operation to overthrow the communist government of Albania. They trained hundreds of anti-communist rebels. They parachuted them into the country at night, expecting them to link up with the resistance. But Philby had sent the coordinates of the drop zones to Moscow. When the rebels landed, they didn't find friends. They found the Albanian secret police waiting with machine guns. Almost every single man was captured, tortured, and executed. The operation was a bloodbath. And back in Washington, Philby comforted a distraught James Angleton, telling him it was just bad luck. But the cracks began to show. The sheer volume of information leaking to Moscow was too great to ignore. By 1951, American codebreakers had deciphered old Soviet messages in a project called Venona. They discovered that there was a mole in the British embassy in Washington, codenamed Homer. The investigation narrowed down to Donald Maclean. Maclean was falling apart. The pressure of leading a double life for nearly 2 decades had destroyed his nerves. He was a raging alcoholic. He would go on benders in Cairo and London, trashing apartments and getting into fights. He famously shouted, "I am the English Hiss," at a party, referring to the American spy Alger Hiss, but everyone thought it was just a drunk joke. By the spring of 1951, MI5 was ready to interrogate Maclean. They planned to bring him in on a Monday morning. Kim Philby saw the net closing. He knew that if Maclean cracked, he would expose the whole ring. Philby needed to get Maclean out. He turned to Guy Burgess. Guy Burgess was the most unlikely spy imaginable. He was flamboyant, openly gay in a time when it was illegal, perpetually drunk, and incredibly messy. He was known for leaving confidential files on the seats of cars. Yet, his chaotic nature was his cover. Nobody believed a spy could be so obvious. Philby ordered Burgess to get Maclean and run. On a Friday night in May 1951, Burgess drove to Maclean's house. It was Maclean's 38th birthday. He told Maclean, "We have to go, now." Maclean said goodbye to his wife and children. He left his toys scattered on the floor. He got into Burgess's car, and they drove to Southampton. They boarded a ferry to France, then disappeared behind the Iron Curtain. When they didn't show up for work on Monday, the British government went into panic mode. The realization that 2 senior diplomats had defected to Moscow sent shockwaves through the Western alliance. The Americans were furious. They threatened to cut off intelligence sharing with Britain completely. But the biggest question remained: who tipped them off? Suspicion fell immediately on the third man, Kim Philby. Philby was recalled from Washington. He was interrogated by MI5. He was asked to resign from MI6. His career was in ruins, but here is the incredible part. He didn't confess. For years, Philby held his ground. He used his class privilege as a shield. His friends in the establishment couldn't believe that good old Kim was a traitor. They defended him. The Foreign Secretary famously cleared him in Parliament, stating there was no evidence against him. Philby actually went back to work as a journalist in Beirut, Lebanon. He continued to work for MI6 as a freelancer, and he continued to spy for the Russians. He survived for another 12 years after his friends fled. It wasn't until 1963 that the game finally ended. A new defector provided undeniable proof. An MI6 officer, Nicholas Elliott, Philby's oldest friend, flew to Beirut to confront him. The confrontation was heartbreaking. Elliott offered Philby immunity if he confessed. Philby gave a partial confession, admitting he was a spy. But he asked for time to say goodbye to his wife. Elliot, perhaps out of a misplaced sense of honor, or perhaps following secret orders to let him go to avoid a trial scandal, left him alone. That night, Kim Philby boarded a Soviet freighter in the port of Beirut. He slipped away into the night, bound for Odessa. He left behind his wife, his children, and the country he had betrayed for 30 years. But what about the others? Anthony Blunt, the fourth man, had the most surreal fate of all. Blunt was the surveyor of the King's pictures. He was an art advisor to Queen Elizabeth II. He was a knight of the realm, Sir Anthony Blunt. When the ring began to collapse, Blunt was offered a secret deal. In 1964, in exchange for a confession, he was granted total immunity. He was allowed to keep his knighthood. He was allowed to keep working for the Queen. For 15 years, the Queen of England was being served by a confessed Soviet spy, and the public had no idea. It wasn't until 1979, when Margaret Thatcher came to power, that Blunt was publicly exposed. He was stripped of his knighthood and died in disgrace 4 years later. John Cairncross, the fifth man, also confessed in secret and was allowed to move to France and live quietly writing books. He was never prosecuted. The legacy of the Cambridge Five is not just about the secrets they stole. It is about the destruction of trust. They destroyed the special relationship between US and British intelligence for a decade. The CIA became deeply paranoid. James Angleton, Philby's friend, went on a witch hunt inside the CIA, convinced that he too had been infiltrated by a mole. He destroyed the careers of loyal officers, paralyzed by the fear that another Philby was hiding in the shadows. In Moscow, the fate of the defectors was grim. They didn't find the socialist paradise they had fought for. Guy Burgess hated Russia. He refused to learn the language. He ordered his suits from Savile Row in London and spent his days drinking himself to death, pining for the cricket grounds of England. He died a lonely alcoholic in Moscow at age 52. Donald Maclean adapted better, learning Russian and working for a Soviet institute, but he remained a broken man. Kim Philby lived the longest. He was given a hero's welcome, given the rank of general in the KGB, and his face appeared on a Soviet postage stamp. But privately, he was disillusioned. The KGB didn't trust him fully. They bugged his apartment. They realized he was a traitor by nature. If he could betray his own country, he could betray them too. He spent his final years drinking heavily, reading the Times of London, and listening to the BBC World Service. He died in 1988, just before the Berlin Wall came down and the system he sacrificed everything for collapsed. The story of the Cambridge Five is a warning about the blindness of privilege. The British establishment couldn't see the enemy because the enemy looked exactly like them. They assumed that a tie, an accent, and a degree from Cambridge were guarantees of loyalty. They were wrong. These 5 men proved that the most dangerous weapon in the Cold War wasn't a nuclear bomb or a poison dart. It was a dinner party in London, a whisper in a club, and a betrayal born in the classrooms of the world's most prestigious university. They were the best and brightest of their generation, and they were the worst traitors the West has ever known. This concludes the file on the Cambridge Five. We have seen how men betray their countries for ideology, but sometimes the betrayal isn't about giving secrets to the enemy. Sometimes it is about taking something that doesn't belong to you. Next time, we move to the deep ocean. We will open the file on the most audacious heist in CIA history. A mission to steal a sunken Soviet submarine from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, right under the nose of the Russian Navy. Next file, Project Azorian, the Glomar Explorer.